The Box Tunnel by Charles Reade. A fact. The 10:15 train glided from Paddington, May 7th, 1847. In the left compartment of a certain first-class carriage were 4 passengers. Of these, 2 were worth description. The lady had a smooth, white, delicate brow, strongly marked eyebrows, long lashes, eyes that seemed to change colour, and a good-sized, delicious mouth, with teeth as white as milk. A man could not see her nose for her eyes and mouth. Her own sex could and would have told us some nonsense about it. She wore an unpretending greyish dress, buttoned to the throat with lozenge-shaped buttons, and a Scotch shawl that agreeably evaded the responsibility of colour. She was like a duck, so tight her plain feathers fitted her, and there she sat, smooth, snug, and delicious, with a book in her hand and a soupçon of her snowy wrist just visible as she held it. Her opposite neighbour was what I call a good style of man, the more to his credit since he belonged to a corporation that frequently turns out the worst imaginable style of young man. He was a cavalry officer, aged 25. He had a moustache, but not a repulsive one, not one of those sub-nasal pigtails on which soup is suspended like dew on a shrub. It was short, thick, and black as coal. His teeth had not as yet been turned by tobacco smoke to the colour of tobacco juice. His clothes did not stick to nor hang on him. They sat on him. He had an engaging smile, and what I liked the dog for, his vanity, which was inordinate, was in its proper place, his heart not in his face, jostling mine and other people's who have none. In a word, he was what one oftener hears of than meets, a young gentleman. He was conversing in an animated whisper with a companion, a fellow officer. They were talking about what it is far better not to do, women. Our friend clearly did not wish to be overheard, for he cast ever and anon a furtive glance at his fair vis-à-vis, and lowered his voice. She seemed completely absorbed in her book, and that reassured him. At last the 2 soldiers came down to a whisper, and in that whisper, the truth must be told, the one who got down at Slough and was lost to posterity bet £10 to 3 that he, who was going down with us to Bath and immortality, would not kiss either of the ladies opposite upon the road. Done? Done. Now I'm sorry a man I have hitherto praised should have lent himself, even in a whisper, to such a speculation, but nobody is wise at all hours, not even when the clock is striking 25, and you are to consider his profession, his good looks, and the temptation. 10 to 3. After Slough, the party was reduced to 3. At Twyford, one lady dropped her handkerchief. Captain Dolignan fell on it like a tiger and returned it like a lamb. 2 or 3 words were interchanged on that occasion. At Reading, the Marlborough of our tale made one of the safe investments of that day. He bought a Times and a Punch. The latter was full of steel pen thrusts and woodcuts. Valour and Beauty deigned to laugh at some inflated humbug or other punctured by Punch. Now laughing together thaws our human ice. Long before Swindon it was a talking match. At Swindon, who so devoted as Captain Dolignan? He handed them out, he souped them, he tough-chickened them, he branded and cochinealed one. Note, this is supposed to allude to 2 decoctions called port and sherry, and imagined by one earthly nation to partake of a vinous nature. And he branded and burnt-sugared the other. On their return to the carriage, one lady passed into the inner compartment to inspect a certain gentleman's seat on that side the line. Reader, had it been you or I, the beauty would have been the deserter. The average one would have stayed with us till all was blue, ourselves included. Not more surely does our slice of bread and butter, when it escapes from our hand, revolve it ever so often, alight face downwards on the carpet. But this was a bit of a fop, Adonis, a dragoon, so Venus remained in a tete-a-tete with him. You have seen a dog meet an unknown female of his species. How handsome, how empressé, how expressive he becomes! Such was Dolignan after Swindon, and to do the dog justice, he got handsomer and handsomer. And you have seen a cat conscious of approaching cream. Such was Miss Haythorne. She became demurer and demurer. Presently our captain looked out of the window and laughed. This elicited an inquiring look from Miss Haythorne. We are only a mile from the box tunnel." "Oh, do you always laugh a mile from the box tunnel?" said the lady. "Invariably." "What for?" "Why, it's a gentleman's joke." "Oh, I don't mind it being silly if it makes me laugh." Captain Dolignan, thus encouraged, recounted to Miss Haythorne the following. A lady and her husband sat together going through the box tunnel. There was one gentleman opposite, and it was pitch dark. After the tunnel, the lady said, "George, how absurd of you to salute me going through the tunnel." "I did no such thing." "You didn't?" "No. Why?" "Why, because somehow I thought you did." Here Captain Dolignan laughed, and endeavoured to lead his companion to laugh, but it was not to be done. The train entered the tunnel. Miss Haythorne. "Oh!" Dolignan. "Oh, what's the matter?" Miss Haythorne. "I'm frightened." Dolignan, moving to her side. "Oh, pray do not be alarmed. I am near you." Miss Haythorne. "You are near me. Very near me indeed, Captain Dolignan." And Dolignan. "Oh, you know my name?" Miss Haythorne. "I heard your friend mention it. Oh, I wish we were out of this dark place." Dolignan. "I could be content to spend hours here, reassuring you, sweet lady." Miss Haythorne. "Oh, nonsense." Dolignan. "Mwah." Crave reader, do not put your lips to the cheek of the next pretty creature you meet, or you will understand what this means. Miss Haythorne. "Oh, oh!" A friend. "Oh, what's the matter?" Miss Haythorne. "Open the door! Open the door!" The door was opened. There was a sound of hurried whispers. The door was shut, and the blind pulled down with hostile sharpness. Miss Haythorne's scream lost a part of its effect, because the engine whistled 40,000 murders at the same moment, and fictitious grief makes itself heard when real cannot. Between the tunnel and Bath, our young friend had time to ask himself whether his conduct had been marked by that delicate reserve which is supposed to distinguish the perfect gentleman. With a long face, real or feigned, he held open the door. His late friends attempted to escape on the other side. Impossible. They must pass him. She whom he had insulted, Latin for kissed, deposited somewhere at his foot a look of gentle blushing reproach. The other, whom he had not insulted, darted red-hot daggers at him from her eyes. And so they parted. It was perhaps fortunate for Dolignan that he had the grace to be friends with Major Hoskins of his regiment, a veteran laughed at by the youngsters, for the Major was too apt to look coldly upon billiard balls and cigars. He had seen cannon balls and linstocks. He had also, to tell the truth, swallowed a good bit of the mess-room poker, but with it some sort of moral poker, which made it as impossible for Major Hoskins to descend to an ungentlemanlike word or action as to brush his own trousers below the knee. Captain Dolignan told this gentleman his story in gleeful accents, but Major Hoskins heard him coldly, and as coldly answered that he had known a man lose his life for the same thing. "That is nothing," continued the Major, "but unfortunately he deserved to lose it." At this the blood mounted to the younger man's temples, and his senior added, "I mean to say, he was 35. You, I presume, are 21? 25. Oh, that's much the same thing. Will you be advised by me?"
"Oh, if you will advise me." "Speak to no one of this, and send White the £3, that he may think you've lost the bet." "Oh, that's hard when I won it." "Do it for all that, sir."
Let the disbelievers in human perfectibility know that this dragoon capable of a blush did this virtuous action, albeit with violent reluctance, and it was his first damper. A week after these events he was at a ball. He was in that state of factious discontent which belongs to us amiable English. He was looking in vain for a lady equal in personal attraction to the idea he had formed of George Dolignan as a man, when suddenly there glided past him a most delightful vision, a lady whose beauty and symmetry took him by the eyes. Another look. It can't be. Yes, it is. Miss Haythorne. Not that he knew her name, but what an apotheosis! The duck had become a peahen, radiant, dazzling. She looked twice as beautiful and almost twice as large as before. He lost sight of her. He found her again. She was so lovely she made him ill, and he alone must not dance with her nor speak to her. If he had been content to begin her acquaintance in the usual way, it might have ended in kissing. But having begun with kissing, it must end in nothing. As she danced, sparks of beauty fell from her on all around but him. She did not see him. It was clear she would never see him. One gentleman was particularly assiduous. She smiled on his assiduity. He was ugly, but she smiled on him. Dolignan was surprised at his success, his ill taste, his ugliness, his impertinence. Dolignan at last found himself injured. Who was this man, and what right had he to go on so? He had never kissed her, I suppose, said Dolly. Dolignan could not prove it, but he felt that somehow the rights of property were invaded. He went home and dreamed of Miss Haythorne, and hated all the ugly successful. A note: when our successful rival is ugly, the blow is doubly severe and crushing. We fall by bludgeon, we who thought the keenest rapier might perchance thrust at us in vain. He spent a fortnight trying to find out who this beauty was. He never could encounter her again. At last he heard of her in this way. A lawyer's clerk paid him a little visit, and commenced a little action against him in the name of Miss Haythorne for insulting her in a railway train. The young gentleman was shocked, endeavoured to soften the lawyer's clerk. That machine did not thoroughly comprehend the meaning of the term. The lady's name, however, was at last revealed by this untoward incident. From her name to her address was but a short step, and the same day our crestfallen hero lay in wait at her door, and many a succeeding day, without effect. But one fine afternoon she issued forth quite naturally, as if she did it every day, and walked briskly on the nearest parade. Dolignan did the same. He met and passed her many times on the parade, and searched for pity in her eyes, but found neither look, nor recognition, nor any other sentiment. For all this she walked and walked, till all the other promenaders were tired and gone. Then her culprit summoned resolution, and taking off his hat with a voice tremulous for the first time, besought permission to address her. She stopped, blushed, and neither acknowledged nor disowned his acquaintance. He blushed, and stammered out how ashamed he was, how he deserved to be punished, how he was punished, how little she knew how unhappy he was, and concluded by begging her not to let all the world know the disgrace of a man who was already mortified enough by the loss of her acquaintance. She asked an explanation. He told her of the action that had been commenced in her name, and she gently shrugged her shoulders and said, "Oh, how stupid they are!"
Emboldened by this, he begged to know whether or not a life of distant, unpretending devotion would, after a lapse of years, erase the memory of his madness, his crime. She did not know. She must now bid him adieu, as she had some preparations to make for a ball in the Crescent, where everybody was to be. They parted, and Dolignan determined to be at the ball where everybody was to be. He was there, and after some time he obtained an introduction to Miss Haythorne, and he danced with her. Her manner was gracious. With the wonderful tact of her sex, she seemed to have commenced the acquaintance that evening. That night, for the first time, Dolignan was in love. I will spare the reader all the lover's arts by which he succeeded in dining where she dined, in dancing where she danced, in overtaking her by accident when she rode. His devotion followed her even to church, where our dragoon was rewarded by learning there is a world where they neither polk nor smoke, the two capital abominations of this one. He made acquaintance with her uncle, who liked him, and he saw at last with joy that her eye loved to dwell upon him when she thought he did not observe her. It was 3 months after the Box Tunnel that Captain Dolignan called one day upon Captain Hawthorne, R.N., whom he had met twice in his life, and slightly propitiated by resolutely listening to a cutting-out expedition. He called, and in the usual way asked permission to pay his addresses to his daughter. The worthy captain straightway began doing quarter-deck, when suddenly he was summoned from the apartment by a mysterious message. On his return, he announced, with a total change of voice, that it was all right, and his visitor might run alongside as soon as he chose. My reader has divined the truth. This nautical commander, terrible to the foe, was in complete and happy subjugation to his daughter, our heroine. As he was taking leave, Dolignan saw his divinity glide into the drawing-room. He followed her, observed a sweet consciousness which encouraged him. That consciousness deepened into confusion. She tried to laugh. She cried instead, and then she smiled again, and when he kissed her hand at the door, it was George and Marion instead of Captain this and Miss the other. A reasonable time after this, for my tale is merciful and skips formalities and torturing delays, these two were very happy. They were once more upon the railroad, going to enjoy the honeymoon all by themselves. Marion Dolignan was dressed just as before, duck-like and delicious, all bright except her clothes. But George sat beside her this time instead of opposite, and she drank him in gently from under her long eyelashes. "Marion," said George, "married people should tell each other all. Will you ever forgive me if I own to you—" "No."
"Yes, yes."
"Well, then, you remember the Box Tunnel?" This was the first allusion he had ventured to it. "I'm ashamed to say I had bet £3 to £10 with White I would kiss one of you two ladies." And George, pathetic externally, chuckled within.
"Oh, I know that, George. I overheard you," was the demure reply.
"You overheard me? Impossible."
"And did you not hear me whisper to my companion? I made a bet with her."
"You made a bet? How singular! What was it?"
"Only a pair of gloves, George."
"Oh, yes, I know. But what about?"
"Oh, that if you did, you should be my husband, dearest."
"Oh, but stay. Then you could not have been so very angry with me, love. Why, dearest, then who brought that action against me?"
Mrs. Dolignan looked down. "I was afraid you were forgetting me. George, you will never forgive me?"
"Oh, sweet angel! Oh, why, here is the Box Tunnel."
"Now, reader, fie! No, no such thing.
You can't expect to be indulged in this way every time we come to a dark place. Besides, it's not the thing. Consider, two sensible, married people. No such phenomenon, I assure you, took place. No scream issued in hopeless rivalry of the engine this time. End of The Box Tunnel by Charles Reade.
A Service of Love by O. Henry. When one loves one's art, no service seems too hard. Well, that is our premise. This story shall draw a conclusion from it and show at the same time that the premise is incorrect. That will be a new thing in logic and a feat in storytelling somewhat older than the Great Wall of China. Joe Larrabee came out of the post oak flats of the Middle West, pulsing with a genius for pictorial art. At 6, he drew a picture of the town pump with a prominent citizen passing it hastily. This effort was framed and hung in the drugstore window by the side of the ear of corn with an uneven number of rows. At 20, he left for New York with a flowing necktie and capital tied up somewhat closer. Delia Carruthers did things in 6 octaves so promisingly in a pine tree village in the South that her relatives chipped in enough in her chip hat for her to go north and finish. They could not see her, but that is our story. Joe and Delia met in an atelier where a number of art and music students had gathered to discuss chiaroscuro, Wagner, music, Rembrandt's works, pictures, Waldteufel, wallpaper, Chopin, and Oolong. Joe and Delia became enamored one of the other, or each of the other, as you please, and in a short time were married. For when one loves one's art, no service seems too hard. Mr. and Mrs. Larrabee began housekeeping in a flat. It was a lonesome flat, something like the A sharp way down on the left end of a keyboard. And they were happy, for they had their art and they had each other. And my advice to the rich young man would be, sell all thou hast and give it to the poor janitor for the privilege of living in a flat with your art and your Delia. Flat dwellers shall endorse my dictum that theirs is the only true happiness. If a home is happy, it cannot fit too close. Let the dresser collapse and become a billiard table. Let the mantel turn into a rowing machine, the escritoire to a separate bedchamber, the washstand to an upright piano. Let the 4 walls come together, if they will, so you and your Delia are between. But if home be the other kind, let it be wide and long. Enter you at the Golden Gate, hang your hat on Hatteras, your cape on Cape Cod, and go out by the Labra door. Joe was painting in the class of the great Magister. You know his fame. His fees are high, his lessons are light, his highlights have brought him renown. Delia was studying under Rosenstock. You know his repute as a disturber of the piano keys. They were mighty happy as long as their money lasted. So is but I will not be cynical. Their aims were very clear and defined. Joe was to become capable very soon of turning out pictures that old gentlemen with thin side whiskers and thick pocketbooks would sandbag one another in his studio for the privilege of buying. Delia was to become familiar and then contemptuous with music, so that when she saw the orchestra seats in boxes unsold, she would have a sore throat and lobster in a private dining room and refuse to go on the stage. But the best, in my opinion, was the home life in the little flat, the ardent, voluble chats after the day's study, the cozy dinners and fresh light breakfasts, the interchange of ambitions interwoven each with the others, or else inconsiderable, the mutual help and inspiration, and overlook my artlessness, stuffed olives and cheese sandwiches at 11 p.m. But after a while, art flagged. It sometimes does, even if some switchman doesn't flag it. Everything going out and nothing coming in, as the Vulgarians say. Money was lacking to pay Mr. Magister and Herr Rosenstock their prices. When one loves one's art, no service seems too hard. So Delia said she must give music lessons to keep the chafing dish bubbling. For 2 or 3 days she went out canvassing for pupils. One evening she came home elated. "Joe, dear," she said gleefully, "I've a pupil, and oh, the loveliest people! General A.B. Pinckney's daughter on 71st Street. Such a splendid house, Joe. You ought to see the front door. Byzantine, I think you would call it. And inside, oh, Joe, I never saw anything like it before. My pupil is his daughter Clementina. I dearly love her already. She's a delicate thing, dresses always in white, and the sweetest, simplest manners. Only 18 years old. I'm to give 3 lessons a week, and just think, Joe, $5 a lesson. I don't mind it a bit, for when I get 2 or 3 more pupils, I can resume my lessons with Herr Rosenstock. Now, smooth out that wrinkle between your brows, dear, and let's have a nice supper." "Oh, that's all right for you, Delie," said Joe, attacking a can of peas with a carving knife and a hatchet. "But how about me? Do you think I'm going to let you hustle for wages while I philander in the regions of high art? Not by the bones of Benvenuto Cellini. I guess I can sell papers or lay cobblestones and bring in $1 or 2. Delia came and hung around his neck. "Joe, dear, you are silly. You must keep on at your studies. It is not as if I had quit my music and gone to work at something else. While I teach, I learn. I am always with my music, and we can live as happily as millionaires on $15 a week. You mustn't think of leaving Mr. Magister." "All right," said Joe, reaching for the blue scalloped vegetable dish. "But I hate for you to be giving lessons. It isn't art. But you're a trump and a dear to do it. When one loves one's art, no service seems too hard," said Delia. "Magister praised the sky in that sketch I made in the park," said Joe, "and Tinkle gave me permission to hang 2 of them in his window. I may sell one if the right kind of moneyed idiot sees them." "Well, I'm sure you will," said Delia sweetly. "And now let's be thankful for General Pinckney and this veal roast." During all of the next week the Larrabees had an early breakfast. Joe was enthusiastic about some morning effect sketches he was doing in Central Park, and Delia packed him off breakfasted, coddled, praised, and kissed at 7 o'clock. Art is an engaging mistress. It was most times 7 o'clock when he returned in the evening. At the end of the week, Delia, sweetly proud but languid, triumphantly tossed 3 $5 bills on the 8 by 10 inches center table of the 8 by 10 feet flat parlor. "Sometimes," she said a little wearily, "Clementina tries me. I'm afraid she doesn't practice enough, and I have to tell her the same thing so often. And then she always dresses entirely in white, and that does get monotonous. But General Pinckney is the dearest old man. I wish you could know him, Joe. He comes in sometimes when I am with Clementina at the piano. He's a widower, you know, and stands there pulling on his white goatee." "And how are the semiquavers and the demi-semiquavers progressing?" he always asks. "I wish you could see the wainscoting in that drawing-room, Joe. And those astrakhan rug portieres, and Clementina has such a funny little cough. I hope she is stronger than she looks. Oh, I am really getting attached to her, Joe. She is so gentle and high-bred. General Pinckney's brother was once minister to Bolivia. And then Joe, with the air of a Monte Cristo, drew forth a 10, a 5, a 2, and a 1, all legal tender notes, and laid them beside Delia's earnings. "Sold that watercolor of the obelisk to a man from Peoria," he announced overwhelmingly. "Oh, don't joke with me," said Delia. "Not from Peoria." "All the way. I wish you could see him, Delie. Fat man with a woolen muffler and a quill toothpick. He saw the sketch in Tinkle's window and thought it was a windmill at first. He was game, though, and bought it anyhow. He ordered another, an oil sketch of the Lackawanna freight depot, to take back with him. Music lessons. Oh, I guess art is still in it." "I'm so glad you've kept on," said Delia heartily. "You're bound to win, dear. $33. We've never had so much to spend before. We'll have oysters tonight." "And filet mignon with champignons," said Joe. "Where is the olive fork?" On the next Saturday evening, Joe reached home first. He spread his $18 on the parlor table and washed what seemed to be a great deal of dark paint from his hands. Half an hour later, Delia arrived, her right hand tied up in a shapeless bundle of wraps and bandages. "How is this?" asked Joe, after the usual greetings. Delia laughed, but not very joyously. "Clementina," she explained, "insisted on a Welsh rabbit after her lesson. She is such a queer girl. Welsh rabbits at 5 in the afternoon." The general was there. You should have seen him run for the chafing dish, Joe, just as if there wasn't a servant in the house. "I know Clementina isn't in good health. She is so nervous. In serving the rabbit, she spilled a great lot of it boiling hot over my hand and wrist. It hurt awfully, Joe, and the dear girl was so sorry. But General Pinckney, Joe, that old man nearly went distracted. He rushed downstairs and sent somebody, they said the furnace man or somebody in the basement, out to a drugstore for some oil and things to bind it up with. It doesn't hurt so much now." "What's this?" asked Joe, taking the hand tenderly and pulling at some white strands beneath the bandages. "It's something soft," said Delia, "that had oil on it." "Oh, Joe, did you sell another sketch?" She had seen the money on the table. "Did I?" said Joe. "Just ask the man from Peoria. He got his depot today, and he isn't sure, but he thinks he wants another parkscape and a view on the Hudson. What time this afternoon did you burn your hand, Delie?" 5 o'clock, I think," said Delie plaintively. The rabbit came off the fire about that time. You ought to have seen General Pinckney, Joe, when—" "Sit down here a moment, Delie," said Joe. He drew her to the couch, sat down beside her, and put his arm across her shoulders. "What have you been doing for the past 2 weeks, Delie?" he asked. She braved it for a moment or two, with an eyeful of love and stubbornness, and murmured a phrase or two vaguely of General Pinckney. But at length down went her head, and out came the truth and tears. "I couldn't get any pupils," she confessed, "and I couldn't bear to have you give up your lessons, and I got a place ironing shirts in that big 24th Street laundry, and I think I did very well to make up both General Pinckney and Clementina, don't you, Joe? And when a girl in the laundry set down a hot iron on my hand this afternoon, I was all the way home making up that story about the Welsh rabbit. You're not angry, are you, Joe? And if I hadn't got the work, you mightn't have sold your sketches to that man from Peoria." "He wasn't from Peoria," said Joe slowly. "Well, it doesn't matter where he was from. How clever you are, Joe, and kiss me, Joe. And what made you ever suspect that I wasn't giving music lessons to Clementina?" "I didn't," said Joe, "until tonight, and I wouldn't have then, only I sent up this cotton waste and oil from the engine room this afternoon for a girl upstairs who had her hand burned with a smoothing iron. I've been firing the engine in the laundry for the past 2 weeks." "And then you didn't—" "My purchaser from Peoria," said Joe, "and General Pinckney are both creations of the same art. But you wouldn't call it either painting or music." And then they both laughed, and Joe began, "When one loves one's art, no service seems—" But Delia stopped him with her hand on his lips. "No," she said, "just when one loves." End of A Service of Love by O. Henry.
Love Letters of Margaret Fuller, 1845 through 1846. Waverly Place, Sunday afternoon, 6th April, 1845. Can my friend have a doubt as to the nature of my answer? Could the heart of woman refuse its sympathy to this earnestness in behalf of an injured woman? Could a human heart refuse its faith to such sincerity, even if it had accompanied the avowal of error? Heaven be praised that it does not. Some of your expressions, especially the use of the word atonement, had troubled me. I knew not what to think. Now I know all, and surely all is well. The first day we passed together, as you told me of your first being here, when you came to the telling the landlord so ingenuously that you had no money, and said the tears ran down my boyish cheeks. My heart sprang toward you, and across the interval of years, and I stood beside you and wiped away those tears and told you they were pearls consecrated to truth. You said you would not do so now, but I believe you would act now with the same truthfulness, though in a different manner as becomes the man, according to the degree in which circumstances should call on you. And so it is. There are no tears nor cause to shed any. I need not approach so tenderly as I might have to the boy. But if it be of avail to bless you, to express a fervent hope that your great and tender soul may harmonize all your nature more and more, and create to itself a life in which it may expand all its powers, this hope, this blessing take from the one in whom you have confided, and never again fear that such an experiment may fail. Indeed, I have suffered much since receiving the letter. I came into town yesterday with that winged feeling that often comes with the early sunshine. When the letter came, I could not wait, and though there was only time for a glance upon it, a cold faintness came upon me. I took off the flowers I had put on, expressive of my feelings a little hour before, and gave them to the blind girl, for I almost envied her for being in her shut-up state less subject to the sudden shocks of feeling. For there I read at once the exact confirmation of what had been told of me of your position, and could not read the whole, to be soothed by its sense and spirit. For this day had been given to others, and the evening to a circle of new acquaintance. Not till I went to my room for the night was there any peace or stillness, and all things swam before me, so I felt the falsity of the position in which you had placed yourself, that you had acted a fiction, and, though from honorable, nay, from heroic motives, had endured the part of a rogue. I felt, too, that you had probably been tempted by the romance of the position, and with a firmer, clearer determination to acknowledge with simplicity, might have found some other way. I placed the letter next to my heart, and all day it seemed to comfort me and assure me that when I would be once alone, peace would come, and it has come. As to our relations, I wish these circumstances to make no difference in them in private, nor as to being together in public. Now that I know all, and have made up my own mind, I have no fear nor care. I am myself exposed to misconstruction constantly from what I write. Blame cannot hurt me, for I have not done wrong, and have too much real weight of character to be sunk, unless by real stones of offence being attached to me. As I feel for myself, so do I for a friend. You are noble. I have elected to abide by you. We will act as if these clouds were not in the sky. My feeling with you was so delightful. It was a feeling of childhood. I was pervaded by the ardor, upborne by the strength of your nature, gently drawn near to the realities of life. I should have been happy to be thus led by the hand through green and sunny paths, or like a child to creep close to the side of my companion, listening long to his stories of things unfamiliar to my thoughts. Now this deeper strain has been awakened. It proves indeed an unison, but will the strings ever vibrate to the lighter airs again? And now farewell. Come to see me so soon as you will in May. Farewell, and love ever your friend. P.S. I stay here today, but go back to the farm tomorrow morning. As to your letter, I cannot yet part with it. At present it is safe as myself, and before you go shall be disposed of as you desire. I feel as if I had not expressed enough my deep interest in what you have done, but it was because of beginning with a sense that you must know that, and the wish to satisfy you as to myself. You will read, I believe, what was left unwritten. End of letter 15.
The Secret of Labra by T.W. Woolston. In very ancient days there was a king in Ireland named Labra, who was called Labra the Sailor, for a certain voyage that he made. Now Labra was never seen save by one man once a year, without a hood that covered his head and ears. But once a year it was his habit to let his hair be cropped, and the person to do this was chosen by lot, for the king was accustomed to put to death instantly the man who had cropped him. And so it happened that on a certain year the lot fell on a young man who was the only son of a poor widow who dwelt near by the palace of the king. When she heard that her son had been chosen, she fell on her knees before the king and besought him with tears that her son, who was her only support and all she had in the world, might not suffer death as was customary. The king was moved by her grief and her entreaties, and at last he consented that the young man should not be slain, provided that he vowed to keep secret to the day of his death what he should see. The youth agreed to this, and he vowed by the sun and the wind that he would never, so long as he lived, reveal to man what he should learn when he cropped the king's hair. So he did what was appointed for him and went home. But when he did so, he had no peace, for the wonder of the secret that he had learned preyed upon his mind, so that he could not rest for thinking of it and longing to reveal it, and at last he fell into a wasting sickness from it, and was near to die. Then there was brought to see him a wise druid, who was skilled in all maladies of the mind and body, and after he had talked with the youth, he said to his mother, "Thy son is dying of the burden of a secret, which he may not reveal to any man, but until he reveals it, he will have no ease. Let him therefore walk along the highway till he comes to a place where 4 roads meet. Let him then turn to the right, and the first tree that he shall meet on the roadside, let him tell the secret to it, and so it may be he shall be relieved, and his vow will not be broken." The mother told her son of the druid's advice, and next day he went upon his way till he came to 4 crossroads, and he took the road upon the right, and the first tree he found was a great willow tree. So the young man laid his cheek against the bark, and he whispered the secret to the tree, and as he turned back homeward he felt lightened of his burden, and he leaped and sang, and ere many days were past he was as well and light-hearted as ever he had been in his life. Some while after that, it happened that the king's harper, named Craftney, broke the straining post of his harp, and went out to seek for a piece of wood wherewith to mend it. And the first timber he found that would fit the purpose was the willow tree by the crossroads. He cut it down therefore, and took as much as would give him a new straining post, and he bore it home with him, and mended his harp with it. That night he played after meat before the king and his lords, as he was wont. But whatever he played and sang, the folk that listened to him seemed to hear only one thing: 2 horses' ears hath Labra the sailor. Then the king plucked off his hood, and after that he made no secret of his ears, and none suffered on account of them thenceforward. End of The Secret of Labra by T.W. Rolston. Recording by Chad Warner for Ballyclare in County Antrim, Northern Ireland, situated in the northeast of the island of Ireland. The knowledge of Christ's love. It is the distinguishing mark of God's people that they know the love of Christ. Without exception, all those who have passed from death unto life, whatever they may not know, have learned this, and without exception all those who are not saved, whatever they may know besides, knowing nothing of this. For to know the love of Christ, to taste its sweetness, to realize it personally, experimentally, and vitally, as shed abroad in our hearts by the Holy Ghost, is the privilege of the child of God alone. This is the secure enclosure into which the stranger cannot enter. This is the garden of the Lord, so well protected by walls and hedges that no wild boar of the wood can enter. Only the redeemed of the Lord shall walk here. They, and only they, may pluck the fruits and content themselves with the delights thereof. How important then becomes the question: do I know the love of Christ? Have I felt it? Do I understand it? Is it shed abroad in my heart? Do I know that Jesus loves me? Is my heart quickened and animated and warmed and attracted towards him through the great truth that it recognizes and rejoices in, that Christ has really loved me and chosen me and set his heart upon me? But while it is true that every child of God knows the love of Christ, it is equally true that all the children of God do not know this love to the same extent. They are in Christ's family, babes, young men, strong men, and fathers, and as they grow and progress in all other matters, so they most certainly make advances here. Indeed, an increase of love, a more perfect apprehension of Christ's love, is one of the best and most infallible gauges whereby we may test ourselves whether we have grown in grace or not. If we have grown in grace, it is absolutely certain that we shall have advanced in our knowledge and reciprocation of the love of Christ. Many have believed in Jesus and know a little of his love, but oh, it is little indeed they know in comparison with some others who have been brought into the inner chamber and made to drink of the spiced wine of Christ's pomegranate. Some have begun to climb the mountain, and the view which lies at their feet is lovely and passing fair, but the landscape is not such as would greet their eyes if they could but stand where advanced saints are standing, and could look to the east and to the west, to the north and to the south, and see all the lengths and breadths and depths and heights of the love of Christ, which passes knowledge. End of The Knowledge of Christ's Love by Charles Haddon Spurgeon.
A short story by Ernest Hemingway. One hot evening in Milan, they carried him up onto the roof, and he could look out over the top of the town. There were chimney swifts in the sky. After a while it got dark, and the searchlights came out. The others went down and took the bottles with them. He and Ag could hear them below on the balcony. Ag sat on the bed. She was cool and fresh in the hot night. Ag stayed on night duty for 3 months. They were glad to let her. When they operated on him, she prepared him for the operating table, and they had a joke about friend or enema. He went under the anesthetic, holding tight onto himself so that he would not blab about anything during the silly, talky time. After he got on crutches, he used to take the temperature so Ag would not have to get up from the bed. There were only a few patients, and they all knew about it. They all liked Ag. As he walked back along the halls, he thought of Ag in his bed. Before he went back to the front, they went into the Duomo and prayed. It was dim and quiet, and there were other people praying. They wanted to get married, but there was not enough time for the banns, and neither of them had birth certificates. They felt as though they were married, but they wanted everyone to know about it, and to make it so they could not lose it. Ag wrote him many letters that he never got until after the armistice, 15 came in a bunch, and he sorted them by the dates and read them all straight through. They were about the hospital and how much she loved him and how it was impossible to get along without him and how terrible it was missing him at night. After the armistice, they agreed he should go home to get a job so that they might get married. Ag would not come home until he had a good job and could come to New York to meet her. It's understood he would not drink, and he did not want to see his friends or anyone in the States, only to get a job and be married. On the train from Padova to Milan, they quarreled about her not being willing to come home at once. When they had to say goodbye in the station at Padova, they kissed goodbye, but were not finished with the quarrel. He felt sick about saying goodbye like that. He went to America on a boat from Genoa. Ag went back to Torre di Mosta to open a hospital. It was lonely and rainy there, and there was a battalion of Arditi quartered in the town. Living in the muddy, rainy town in the winter, the major of the battalion made love to Ag, and she had never known Italians before, and finally wrote a letter to the States that theirs had been only a boy and girl affair. She was sorry, and she knew he would probably not be able to understand, but might someday forgive her and be grateful to her. And she expected, absolutely unexpectedly, to be married in the spring. She loved him as always, but she realized now it was only a boy and girl love. She hoped he would have a great career and believed in him absolutely. She knew it was for the best. The major did not marry her in the spring or any other time. Ag never got an answer to her letter to Chicago about it. A short time after, he contracted gonorrhea from a salesgirl from the fair riding in a taxicab through Lincoln Park. End of a short story by Ernest Hemingway.
Extravagance of Love by Archbishop Alexander. Whenever this gospel is preached, this that she had done shall be told as a memorial of her. What a gracious memorial, and how worthy of it was Mary's beautiful outburst of generosity. But what a pity that the speech of Judas should be recorded also as a memorial of him. And yet, on mature consideration, we would not have the Judas criticism forgotten, because it called forth what we might not otherwise have had, the vindication of Jesus himself, and because, as a matter of fact, we are constantly hearing the protest of Judas repeated in our own day, and are often ill-held to know how to meet it. This he said, records our evangelist bluntly, not because he loved the poor, but because he was a thief and kept the bag. Yet he might have been an honest man and said the same thing, for very many honest and earnest men and women are repeating this criticism still. It is repeated whenever it is taken for granted that practical utility is the only standard by which to judge actions and offerings, that God and man can be served in no other way than by iron bars and perspiration. How often do we meet the type of mind that admits the service of a ploughman and denies that of poet or artist, for whom the waterfall, as somebody has said, exists merely as so much power for driving turbines, and whose sole test of usefulness is that of making two blades grow, and corn blades at that, where but one grew before. We are commonly browbeaten by this type of person, and yet we feel that somehow, if we could only say it, he is wrong, that the poet's is as divine a vocation as the farmer's, that God meant a silver band of falling water in a green glade to suggest other things besides dynamos, and that he who even paints some blades of grass, and paints them pleasingly, has his place somewhere in the great guild of servants of God and man. One has heard the same attitude taken up in other directions too. Why spend so much money on a church, you will be asked, when there are so many poor people in the land? What need for stone pillars and a fine organ, when a plain building and a harmonium would do as well? Why try to secure what is called a beautiful church service, dignified, stately, musical, when the very baldest worship is acceptable in God's sight, if only it be sincere? We have heard all that, and other remarks like that, often, and we have seldom been able to give reasons against them. A mere instinctive sentiment seems a feeble thing to oppose to such cold and hard facts. Yet somehow we feel that it is all wrong if only we knew how to convict it. Did it ever occur to you that Jesus himself has answered that objection, and others like it, when he vindicated Mary's action that night? There is no doubt that her ointment cost a deal of money that could have fed many hungry people. It was an extravagant offering without any practical outcome, save that Jesus was refreshed. There is no doubt also about our Lord's sympathy with the poor and needy, and yet he upheld Mary's action and would not have it called wasteful. All that could be said in this favour was that it was beautiful, that it touched Jesus keenly and influenced all who saw it done, and that, as I read the story, was one reason at least why Jesus defended it. He allows the beautiful. He would have the beautiful honoured, even in a world so full of sorrow and trouble as this. For my part, I am very grateful that this word of Christ's has been recorded, for it affords sufficient warrant for declaring the poet, the artist, the architect, and all those who are trying to make the world more beautiful, God's servants too. Offering him a gift he does not disdain to recognize, as truly as the physician, the philanthropist, and the preacher, whose object is to make it better. Beauty of form and structure has been lavished profusely by the Creator on creatures too small to be seen. There are more things grow out of God's earth than corn for food or timber for building houses. There's the heather and the wild flowers, the daisies and the violets. Hard-headed common sense asks, what's the use of them? What good do they do? The answer is that they are beautiful, and that seems in God's sight to be justification enough for having made them. So when we see love breaking her alabaster box and pouring forth her offering without stint, as she is doing every day, a mother lavishing care upon an ungrateful son, a husband surrounding a peevish wife with a tireless devotion, or a sister keeping her own love dream at arm's length that she may guard and guide some graceless brother, let us lay our hands upon our lips when we are tempted to criticize. These actions may be foolish, extravagant, quixotic, and may outrage every canon of common sense, but there is a fragrance about them without which the world would be much poorer. They are morally beautiful, and for that reason our Lord himself would teach us they are not to be rudely handled nor judged by any hard standard. Yes, but he said more than that. He found a more complete extenuation of Mary's extravagance. It was because she loved much. Her gift was an offering of love to himself. She hath done it for my burial. And that is the end of the whole matter, my brothers. Love is always extravagant when measured by the tape line of bare duty. It always overflows. It breaks its box and gives everything it has. Yet, like the widow's curse of old, its casket is never empty, for even when it has given its all, the next needy case will find succour at that door. Take your charity subscription sheet to the man who loudly asserts that too much money is being given to the kirk this dull season, and what will you get? Take it also to the man who has signed a bigger cheque than he can well afford, that the house of his God may be made beautiful, and it will be strange if you are sent empty away. Oh no, it is not Mary whose devotion has found outlet in some sudden generosity. It is not she who neglects the poor. End of The Extravagance of Love by Archibald Alexander.